All right. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining me. We'll go ahead and get started here. If you got your questions, go ahead and post them. Should be below the video if you're on a smaller screen. Larger screen should be to the right of the video. Hopefully, everybody had a good weekend. All right. See what we got. All right. Looks like we got some questions in there already. Good deal. All right. First question here is from Ross N. Says, even though I have finished the shallowing course, I'm still pulling shots. Any advice would be appreciated. Look at what's going on video, right? So if you're pulling shots, just because you go through a course doesn't mean that you're shallowing it, right? So you got to look on video to kind of confirm what's going on. If you're pulling shots, then you need to swing more to the right. So just like what Clay talks about in that video, you need to shift that piece of wood and shift it. Assuming you're right-handed, you need to take that piece of wood and shift it to the right and feel like you're swinging more in that direction. Because the reality of what you're doing is you're swinging the club and chopping the wood to the left. You need to chop the wood more out to the right. So that's more than likely what's happening if you're still pulling shots. But if you look on video, it's going to be very obvious if you're doing that or not. All right. So Tom M says, I understand a club's bounce, but can you explain the meaning of grind and why it is important? I need to buy a new sand wedge. I play on course with soft greenside sand, beach sand. So my old club's bounce seemed to work well there, but it doesn't seem to work on fairways. I have a tendency to chunk those shots. So good question. So basically, as far as grind is concerned, I honestly don't know. That's not something I'm not really an expert when it comes to clubs and the construction of clubs and things like that. So that'd be more of a question for a club fitter. So I don't really know anything about grind, but I will tell you that the reason you're chunking your wedges is most likely has nothing to do with the bounce of the club. Because when you're hitting shots off of turf, especially if you're taking like full swing or near full swing wedge shots, you're not even using the bounce of the club. All the bounce of the club is doing is it's helping the club kind of get through the turf, right? So if you're chunking shots, it has nothing to do with the bounce. It has everything to do with where you're hitting the ground in relationship to the ball, right? So you need to hit the ground more where the ball is and not behind the ball, right? So that's what I would be looking at. So that might be getting your weight more forward. With a wedge shot, you're typically not taking like a full swing. So you can kind of put your weight forward and then just kind of keep it there and really focus on hitting down and through the ball to make ball first contact. So, but sorry, I don't really, I'll just be honest with you. I just don't really know that much about grind on clubs. In fact, I don't really know anything about it. All I know is it's just about the way that the club is shaped from my understanding. So, but it's not going to, I can tell you right now, it's not going to make you hit the ground more where the ball is, right? It doesn't really have anything to do with the issue that you described. So Daryl S says, Q, whenever I try to get forward shaft lean and close the club face with the wrist action in the move, I tend to shank my wedges. I do not have the problem with pitching wedge on up. Any advice? Yeah, try to hit the ball off the toe. That would be my advice. Now, you may not have the problem with other clubs, but odds are with the other clubs, you're hitting the ball off the heel, right? Which is a close relative to the shank, right? The reason why we tend to hit more shanks with wedges is because they have more loft, which means that there's a lot more hosel here, right? If you look at a driver, there's a reason why you don't shank drivers, right? Because there's no hosel, right? The hossel's up here. I suppose you could hit a shank with the driver, but it'd be a lot more difficult to do, right? You could hit the ball right here on the face, and it wouldn't be a shank. It'd be extreme heel strike, but it wouldn't be a shank. You hit a ball anywhere in this area, this club, you're gonna be hitting that hosel. Whereas like a 3-iron, the hosel isn't. There's a lot you can hit a lot more off the heel and not get that. So that's most likely what's going on, is that you're probably hitting it in a similar place on your clubs with the wedges than you are with your pitching wedge. It's just that you're getting away with it with your pitching wedge because there's less of a hosel there to hit. It's not sticking out as much. And the faces are typically a little bit smaller on wedges than they are on pitching wedges. So there's just typically going to be more room for you to do that. So you're just hitting the ball off the heel, most likely, with pretty much all your clubs. And you need to get that strike more in the center of the face. So the first thing I would do is I would just change your intention, right? Right now, your intention is to hit the ball in the center of the face. But the reality is that you're hitting everything toward the heel, right? So what you need to do is change your intention to hitting the ball off of the toe. Now, I don't want you to line up. That's one thing that I see a lot of people do, is that they actually line the ball off the toe. But that doesn't fix the problem. So, see, the problem is when you're hitting the ball off of the hosel, right, or if you're hitting the ball off the heel, the sweet spot of the club is moving away from you, right? So if I just stand farther away from it, that doesn't change the problem. The sweet spot of the club is still moving away from me. Right now, if I was a robot, right, if I was a robot that all you had to do is kind of make an adjustment for me, then that wouldn't be that big of a problem, right? But when you play that ball on the toe, you're just going to typically move that sweet spot even more away from you. You're human, right? So it doesn't really fix the problem. In fact, sometimes it compounds the problem, and then you keep moving away from it farther and farther and farther. At some point, you just can't stand any further away from the golf ball, right? So I don't recommend the action of to fix a heel strike or to fix a hosel strike to stand or to line up the ball on the toe or something like that, because it doesn't fix the problem. You need to get the sweet spot to not move away from you so much. And the way to do that is to adjust your intention. Change your intention to hitting the ball off the toe, so that way the sweet spot is not moving so far away from you. Now, that can be a difficult thing to do, especially if it's the first time you've ever tried doing that, right? If you've ever tried to do something that's actually wrong to get the right thing, right? But if you commit to it, right, it's fairly easy to do, right? And once you start hitting the ball in the center of the face, then it's like, okay, well, this is pretty easy to do. Now, you're not going to have to do that forever, right? Like I said, we're human. We're going to adapt, right? So eventually, your feel is going to become real. Your intention is going to be the reality of what's happening. And then you can go back to trying to hit the ball in the center of the face again. But until then, you got to keep trying to hit the ball off the toe until the strike actually starts moving toward the toe, right? But if you have trouble doing that, you can do a couple things that kind of trick your brain into hitting the ball in the place that you want. So one would be an avoidance drill, where you just take like a head cover or something that wouldn't damage your club. If you want to really raise the stakes, you could, put your phone down there or something. I don't recommend that, but if you want to make sure that you're not going to hit the ball off the heel, you can do that. But you can place a head cover just outside the ball like this, right? And you got to hit this ball, right, without hitting the head cover, right? So if I set it up just like an inch outside the ball there, if I hit the ball off the heel at all, I'm going to hit that. So what you got to understand, everything we do in life is to seek comfort, right? It would be uncomfortable to come down and hit that head cover. Put a box there, put another golf ball there, right? It would be uncomfortable to hit those things. So you're going to want to try to avoid that when you do that. Now, once you're able to do that, then get that out of the way. Now, there's nothing magic about having that head cover there, right? So when you remove it, you can't just go back to what you were doing before, because you're just going to, you can't go back to the intention that you had before, because you're just going to go back to hitting the ball off the heel again. You have to imagine like that head cover is there and then do it. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to use a tee. So if you imagine like this pen here is a tee. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place that tee an inch on the inside of my ball, and I'm going to line up to that ball, but I'm going to try to hit that tee in the center of the face, right? And once you're able to do that, right, and what will likely happen is you'll likely hit the ball more in the center of the face. But once that moves the ball to the center of the face, now we can move that pin out of the way, or that tee, excuse me, out of the way. And then you got to imagine like that tee is there and try to hit the tee. And if you actually start hitting the ball off the toe, then you can ease off of that. But those are a couple of ways that you can do that. Now, you can't do that on the course, right? You can't use these on the course. So this would be in practice, which is why you have to get to where you can do it and then kind of have a visual that's there. But that's what I would recommend doing. That's more than likely. It's not that you're just hitting the ball off the heel with your wedge. Is most likely happening with pretty much all your clubs. It's just that you're getting it off the hosel with the wedge because there's less room for air there. All right, let's keep going. Let's see here. So Robert K says, been afraid to commit to using the bounce on my pitches, but I finally tried in a round and weather better and worked better than I ever dreamed. As I do this more, one question: are there any greenside lies where bounce does not work? And if so, what's the approach to those? Well, I mean, basically you're going to be using, if it's a chip or something like that, you're going to be using the bounce in some way. You may not be using it to bounce to hit the ball, but you may be using it to get through the turf. So just like, if it's a normal shot, right? If it's a normal shot when I'm coming in and I'm getting shaft lean, right? I'm not really using bounce at the time that I'm hitting the ball, but as it's going through the turf, it's allowing the wedge to get through the turf more easily. Right, so it's not continuing to dig down into the turf. It's kind of slivering through the turf. I would say maybe if you had a shot where you have to play, you have a really, really deep lie, right? And you're in the deep rough or something like that, you have to have that ball back in your stance and kind of hit down on it a lot. You wouldn't really be using the bounce there, and you wouldn't want to. You would want that club to kind of dig down and get underneath the ball. So basically, any situation where you want the club to dig down and get underneath the ball would be where you wouldn't use where you wouldn't be using the bounce, right? In those situations, you're typically going to be playing the ball a little bit more back in your stance or something like that to be able to have access to the ball. So Jim says, when trying to release the club, I tend to hit the ground burners towards the left. I seem to do better trying to hold the face through contact and getting a bit of a fade. What am I doing wrong? I would look on video to see what's really going on, because odds are what you feel is happening is not the reality of what's going on. Now, when you release the club later, right, the club's going to hit the ground later, right? So if you look at this, right, so if I come in and I'm right here and I release the club's going to hit the ground back there. If I'm right here and then I release the club a lot later, right, well, the club's going to hit the ground more up here, right? So if you're used to being in a certain position with your body and you're releasing the club later, right, well, you're basically, that's probably where you're probably topping it is basically what's going on. If you're used to coming in right here and then releasing the club into the ground to get underneath the ball, and then now you're coming in, your body's in the same position, you're releasing the club later, and the club's hitting the ground more up here, well, then you're topping it and you're hitting those burners that you're talking about. So I would guess that's what's going on, but it's hard to say without seeing your swing. I would look on video to see what's going on for sure. But odds are you probably need to feel like you're moving down and kind of covering the ball, right? If we're releasing the club later, we need to cover the ball more. We need to be more on top of the ball, have our hips pushed back and our chest pushed down to get those hands lower to be able to get to the ground. So Chris H says, been working through the system and have developed an issue with hitting it fat. I've tried the towel on the ground drill and I'm just killing towels. Well, there's nothing magic about just putting a towel on the ground. The towel's just giving you feedback, right? So it's giving you good feedback. So basically there's three main things that control your ground contact, where you hit the ground. One we just talked about is the release of the club, right? So if I'm right here and I just release the club, well, I'm going to hit the ground, right? I'm going to hit the ground way before the ball. I'm going to kill that towel. But if I release the club later, I'm going to miss the towel, right? So that's one piece. That's probably the more difficult piece to change in the swing, which is why it's the last piece of the system and it's not the first piece, right? Um, it's all the other pieces are basically a prerequisite to that piece, right? To the straight line release. Other pieces, the main pieces that are going to control your ground contact are going to be mainly your compression line, right? So our compression line is the line that goes from our lead ankle, lead hip, lead shoulder, right? And that is if I'm going to be angled toward or angled away from the target. You can see how that would change. If I'm like this, right, and I get more leaning toward the target, I'm going to hit the ground more in front. If I get more angled away, I'm going to hit the ball more back. So odds are you're probably hanging back a little bit. You could also be swinging too much from the inside, right? So if I swing too much from the inside, imagine I'm standing at home plate and, straight forward here is center field, second base. If I'm swinging the club down the right field line, down the first base line, my club's going to bottom out more toward my trail foot. If I swing more toward the third base line, my club's going to bottom out more toward the target, right? So basically what you need to do is you need to look at your swing on video and see if you are hanging back in your swing. If you're on your back foot at contact and not moving off, basically unweighting your trail side and mostly on your lead side at impact, then you need to get to your lead side. And that's what's going to help you to get the good ground contact. So we have a course that I would recommend working on to get a quick win, to get rid of hitting the ground before the ball. And that would be our stop chunking and topping course. So to get to that course, click the instruction tab, then click not the instruction tab, click the house icon. That will take you to the home page. And if you scroll down the home page, you'll see a list of all the courses there. Select the stop chunking and topping course. There's like 20 plus or so courses included in your membership. And that would make sure that you're getting your weight shift to your lead side. That's going to be the thing that's probably going to help you the most. All right, let's keep going here. So Dave S says, I've been told that I keep my head down too long and that it hinders my follow through. Basically, it stays down until P9 before it comes up. Do you agree that that is a problem? It can be if you're not getting through the shot, right? So if you're just kind of, if you look at Dustin Johnson, right? Dustin Johnson, if you're talking like P9, that's lead arm parallel. There's a lot of tour players that have their head kind of like this through impact. So it's fine as long as you're getting through the shot. Now, if you look like this, that's one thing, right? But if you look like that and your body is turning through and releasing through the shot, but your head's staying down, and then it comes up as your body comes up into the full finish, that's 100% fine. Look at Dustin Johnson. He stays down through the ball, right? Dustin Johnson is like that through impact. But if you're like this, then that's a problem where your body is stopping because your head isn't turning through. So a lot of it depends on flexibility and how your body's moving through. But if it is a situation where you are keeping the head down, the body's like stalling with it, then you're not turning through the ball. And that can really slow down your speed and make you release the club early. That can lead to some issues for sure. But you just have to look on video to see, what's actually happening. All right, keep the questions coming here. In the meantime, I'll be just doing a little bit of work while you guys are coming up with some questions. So if you're just jumping on here, I'm just waiting for a question to be asked. So if you got questions, go ahead and post them. Like I said, if not, I'm going to continue to try and get a few things done here. All right, so Newmont says, Q, when chipping and using forward shaft lean, are you still using bounce? Depends on how much shaft lean you have. It depends on how open you have the face, right? So if you have the face really square, and keep in mind, you're always using the bounce. It's just a matter of whether you're using it when you're hitting the ball or after you're hitting the ball, right? So at any point during the swing, you're typically going to be using the bounce, right? So if I open the face a ton, right? So if I have no shaft lean, right? Let's say I have a lot of shaft lean, right? A lot of shaft lean, but then I open the face with a lot of shaft lean. Well, that exposes the bounce, right? So if I have the face really, really open and I have shaft lean, it exposes it. I'm using the bounce, right? I'm going to be coming in. I'm going to be hitting the bounce, or I'm going to be bouncing the club off the ground. If I have the face really, really square, right, and I have a lot of shaft lean, well, that kind of takes the bounce out of it when I'm hitting the ball. But after I hit the ball, when it goes into the turf, it's going to help the club kind of glide through the turf. But I'm not using it kind of as a safety blanket to hit the ball, right? So if you just depends on how much. The more shaft lean you have, the more it takes the bounce out. The more open the face is, the more you put the bounce back in. Hey Q, question about hands turning down on the downswing. I see some pros bowing their wrist at the top of the backswing, and some of them turning it as they are coming down. Which one is easier? I find both of them difficult. That's really personal, right? Some it's easier for some to do one over the other. So it really just depends. Try either one. They both might be difficult for you. If it's different from what you already do, now, generally, it's easier. I would say generally it's easier for most people to do it in the start of the downswing. But keep in mind, if you just have a really strong grip, you don't have to do very much of it, right? So if I have a really, really strong grip, meaning, if you go through the 20-minute shadowing fix course, right, and you find your natural grip in that first drill, right, and you find that it's pretty strong, right? So basically, you can think of that as, I would say a strong grip is where, if you think about the club as a clock, right? So the top of the club, like where the logo of the grip is, right? I would say that's 12 o'clock. If you have your thumbs like on 12 o'clock, that I would consider that a weak grip. If you have your thumbs on 1 o'clock, I would consider that to be more of a neutral grip. And if you have your thumbs on 2 o'clock, I would consider that to be more of a strong grip, right? So this would be, you can see how the thumb of my lead hand here, whoops, didn't mean to hit the bottom of the desk there. The thumb of my lead hand is basically on 2 o'clock on that grip. So I would consider that to be a strong grip. So if I have that grip really strong, even with a flat wrist as I'm coming down, you can see how that club face with a flat wrist here is in a pretty strong position, right? Whereas if I was coming down, I had a weak grip, and then I had a flat wrist. Well, look at that club face. The club face is open, right? And then I'm going to have to flip to get to the ball. So if we get that club in a stronger position, I don't really have to do this a lot. It makes that a lot easier. So if you find it difficult to do this when you're coming down, I recommend, or even as you're getting up to the top and trying to keep it as you're coming down, I recommend a stronger grip. It's just going to make it easier. You're not going to have. Now, it doesn't mean that you can come in and have all these, cuppy wrist angles as you're coming into impact. It just makes it easier to get into. You don't have to get into a strong position, because to get shaft lean with a really weak grip, if you look at, there's a lot of tour players that have really weak grips. Colin Morikawa, Victor Hovland, right? Very weak grips. When they come into contact, they have to have this wrist extremely bowed. It's a very difficult thing for people to do, as you probably found. It's a lot easier to have that grip strong. So I'd recommend have a strong and then have more neutral And that way you can have more neutral wrist angles when you come into impact to be able to get shaft lean. And you're not going to be able to have weak wrist angles and do that, because then you're just going to hit the ball way to the left. You still need to have good wrist angles, but not as strong ones as you would need, or difficult ones to achieve for most people if you had a weaker grip. But generally, I would say for most people, it's easier to make those wrist angles happen in the start of the downswing if you're needing to do that. So GB Wyatt says, my ball speed with a 7-iron is 70 miles per hour, but I'm only hitting it 115 yards. What is wrong? Well, I mean, a ball speed of 70 miles per hour would be pretty, I would expect. So you either need to get your club head speed higher, or you need to hit it more solid. It's one or the other, right? Or both, right? It might be both. So yeah, I wouldn't expect to hit your 7-iron very far with 70 mile per hour ball speed, right? If your ball speed, I don't know how far you're wanting to hit your 7-iron, but the average tour player hits their 7-iron probably about 165. And the ball speed's probably going to be, 120 if I had to guess, 115, right? So, yeah, you need to. You're either not getting a lot of ball speed because your club head speed is really low, right? Or because you're not hitting it solid enough, right? You're not hitting it in the center of the face. You're not making ball first contact, something like that. So Tom K says, I've been trying to measure forward shaft lean at impact, which isn't easy to find with my cell phone camera. My swing caddy launch monitor provides launch angle. If I know the loft of my club, say 24 degrees for an 8-iron, can I calculate forward shaft lean from an observed in a launch angle, say 25 degrees? Is there a way to calculate forward shaft lean for that shot? So no. So launch angle is not determined entirely by shaft lean. It's determined by lots of factors, right? So it's determined mostly by shaft lean, that's AKA dynamic loft. So dynamic loft is the loft that you're presenting to the golf ball at impact, right? So static loft is like what your club is. So this wedge here, it's a 56-degree wedge, right? That's what the static loft is. So if I had this shaft straight up and down, and that was 56 degrees, right? But if I get shaft lean, my dynamic loft is going to lower, right? It's going to be less than 56 degrees. So let's say I have the shaft leaning forward 10 degrees. Now my dynamic loft is 10 degrees. Now that strongly influences the launch angle, but there's more that goes into that launch angle as well. So some of what goes into that launch angle is going to be, are you hitting down on the ball, up on the ball, right? If you hit down on the ball, it's going to lower that launch angle, right? So I can come in and flip, but if I hit down on it a lot, it will actually lower my launch angle. So I can come in without very much shaft lean and hit down on it a ton, and it can still launch pretty low, right? Now it won't be very compressed because I'm kind of hitting it more with like a glancing blow, right? I'm kind of coming in like this, right? So that's a big part of it. Strike location is also huge. If you hit the ball low on the face, it will tend to fly lower because the face will twist down, which will de-loft the face a little bit. So that will make the ball launch lower. Your forward shaft lean can be pretty high. You hit it really thin. That's why thin shots tend to go lower, right? Because, well, they tend to launch lower. They may end up going higher because thin shots will typically have more spin. And especially if you hit it into the wind with more spin, that ball will kind of balloon up and go up in the air. So thin shot may actually end up going higher, but it will start out lower had you hit it than if you hit it in the center of the face. So there's also that part of it. And then especially if you're hitting wedges, if you hit a wedge where it's with higher lofted clubs where you hit a little bit, there's moisture on the face or things like that, basically where the face is kind of slipping. If the ball kind of slips and goes up the face, it will go higher as well. So Launch angle, unfortunately, is not a determinant of shaft lean. It's the biggest part of it, but it's not a determinant. There's just too many other variables in there that you can really say, because you could hit a low one and it can be because you hit it thin or because you're hitting down on it a lot. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're getting shaft lean. The other thing is, if you really close the face a lot to the shaft, or close your face to the path. So closing the face also de-lofts the face, right? So, but I can close the face and de-loft the face and change the dynamic loft without changing the amount of shaft lean that I'm getting, right? So I have this much shaft lean, but if I close the face, that de-lofts the face. So that's going to also make it launch lower, right? So there's just too many other variables that you can't really rely on that. So the best thing I would say is use your phone, use the slow motion camera on your phone to see what it is. Most phones these days have 240 frames per second, which is usually more than enough to see shaft lean at impact. Use that, and I would also recommend be in very good daylight, right? So if you're looking at it indoors, the lighting indoors is really, really difficult to see. So if you're out in sunlight on a sunny day, that's going to be your best bet to see if you're getting shaft lean or not. And you use your cell phone camera on slow motion video. That's the best way. Other than that, using a launch monitor that measures dynamic loft, and then having the understanding that if you have the face really closed, it's going to alter that number quite a bit, right? Because it's going to make that dynamic loft number go down, even though your shaft lean isn't increasing, or your shaft lean isn't de-lofting it that much. It's de-lofting because of that. So yeah, looking on camera is probably actually the easiest way of determining whether or not you are getting it. And looking at the release of the club, right? So where the club is releasing, where the club is splitting the forearms, if that's happening more in front, right, where the club's splitting the forearms more toward the target, then that's going to be more shaft lean at impact, right? So that's what I would be looking at. But unfortunately, launch angle is not something that you're going to be able to rely upon to get the to determine if you're getting more forward shaft lean. Certainly can be an indication, but it's not. There's too many other variables in there for it to really be a reliable measurement. So Don Logan says, I've checked out the new lighter, smaller, less expensive version of the Posture Pod, and also talk about. Oh, said, have you checked out the newer, lighter, smaller version of the Posture Pod? I have not. I'm going to be honest with you. I don't even know what that is. Posture Pod. Sounds interesting. Also talk about more drills like the wall drill for keeping hips back and staying in posture during downswing and backswing. So really, I'm more of a keep it simple person. We don't really need. There's a reason why there's tried and true drills, right? Really, all you're trying to do, any good drill just gives you feedback on whether you're doing it or not, right? So there's nothing. All you're trying to do is get feedback. So the wall behind you or the chair behind you, it's giving you feedback on if you are coming up out of your if you're moving your hips forward, right? So that's really all it is. There's nothing really else to do. That's it. So anything else that you can come up with that gives you feedback on whether you're doing this versus this, right? It is completely fine, but really tried and true wall drill, chair drill, whatever it might be. That's what you want to do. But I don't know anything about the Posture Pod. Sorry. Burn S says, I got the PRGR2 to measure swing speed. I feel it is inaccurate to the high side on length. Do you have an opinion on this? So are you talking about the distance? So here's the thing about the PRGR. It's very, very accurate on your club head speed and your ball speed. Especially, it's most accurate on the ball speed. The club head speed's the second most accurate thing, and then the distance is it's based on an algorithm. So it's not really tracking your ball all the way in the air. It only tracks it it's only really taking, basically it has an algorithm within it that it's taking the club you're telling it you're hitting, and with the ball speed and the club head speed that it measured, right? And it has an algorithm, an equation within it that's going to spit out an estimated distance, right? So we found that compared to the flight scope, and compared to the GC quad, which are $20,000+ swing monitors, that it was very accurate on well-struck shots. So if you chunk it or something like that, or if you thin it or hit way off the toe, way off the heel, it wasn't real accurate. But on well-struck shots, it was pretty accurate. It was within 4 or 5 yards or something like that, which for $200 is pretty dang good. But I wouldn't expect it to be super accurate, right? The estimated distance. I personally, I don't use the PRGR. I don't even look at the distance. It means it because it doesn't matter. It's really, you get a PRGR to see your club head speed, and then the ball speed is how efficiently you're using that club head speed, right? So the drivers, mostly what I use the PRGR for. I don't really care that much about my club head speed with any other clubs. I know it's just going to be a smaller, as I go down through the bag, it's just going to incrementally get smaller as I go down through the bag, from the driver to the wedges, because the clubs are shorter, which means I'm going to have a shorter lever arm, creates less speed, right? So, anyway, I don't pay attention to anything else. So all I'm paying attention to when I'm using the PRGR is the club head speed and then the ball speed on top of that. And then even the ball speed I take with a grain of salt sometimes, because I'm usually hitting range balls, and range balls are usually junk, at least where I hit range balls, unfortunately. So if you're hitting range balls somewhere that has really great range balls, and they're changing them out all the time and just throwing old ones away, then you may not have that much of an issue as I do. But the range balls, you just get some bad ones, and you might hit one really good, but it's not going to give you the ball speed because it's not because it's not because it's a junk ball or something like that, right? Those balls get hit hundreds of times, and eventually they're just going to run out of them. So yeah, PRGR, it was pretty accurate, but honestly, if you're getting it to measure your distance with all your clubs, or to see your distances with all your clubs, you're kind of setting yourself up for disappointment. It's really not. I wouldn't use it for that. Really, you're just using it to see your club head speed, and if you're using pretty good balls, the ball speed is a good thing to know as well, and it measures both of those very accurately. So Tom K says, I found this formula from Pro on the internet. Launch angle 85%, dynamic loft 15%, attack angle, assuming center of face contact. Is this formula correct? It's correct for driver, but for irons it's more like 80%. But for driver it's more like 85%. That being said, you don't know what your attack angle is, right? So and it doesn't measure, you're assuming your machine doesn't measure that. If it did measure that, it could tell you what the dynamic loft is. But even if you knew the dynamic loft, the face being closed to your path is going to make the ball launch lower too. So it's not so much, the dynamic loft, what goes into that dynamic loft is closed face, but it's also, it's assuming center face contact. So it's assuming you're going to have no gear effect. There's just too many variables for that to really be. And if you're looking to find out if you're looking for a measurable to see if you're getting more shaft lean or not, it has to come from a video for the most part, and or the dynamic loft. If you're finding the dynamic loft, if your measurement's able to see that, and assuming if you're using something that can measure your dynamic loft, it can also measure the face angle. And basically, you have to subtract that face angle So let's say you have a dynamic loft of 20 degrees, but your face was closed 5 degrees. Realistically, that's more of a 25-degree dynamic loft. And let's assume that you hit it dead center in the face, right? That would be it. If you hit it low on the face, then your dynamic loft was probably even higher, right? So the easiest way to do it is just to look at it on video and to see how much the shaft is leaning forward at impact, if you really want to get a true measurement there. Because you may find that you're just hitting everything thin, and that's making the ball go low, and then you're giving yourself this false sense that you're hitting these really de-lofted shots, when in reality you're just hitting everything thin. All right, so Semk says, Q, so my backswing is very flat past my... So Q, my backswing is very flat past my hip high, so it's difficult to flatten it even more on the downswing. I'm working on a more upright backswing, but it feels weird, and I get out of sequence. Any thoughts on this deal? So if you're already flat, you don't need to flatten it more. Like if you're like this, you don't need to flatten it even more when you're coming down. So you may just need to kind of keep it in the same place, or you may even need to steepen it in the downswing, right? So what we want to understand is that shallowing may not be necessary to get the club in a shallow position, right? So what that means is, let's say that I had the club like this. It was extremely flat. Well, if I shallowed it from here, like the club, I can't hit the ball from there, right? I cannot hit a golf shot from this position. Like it would be very, very difficult. Like especially at full speed, right? So if I'm like this at the top, I actually have to steepen the club to get it to be in a shallow position, right? So this, I steepen the club, but the club is still shallow, right? Now, if I'm up like this, I have to shallow the club to get in a shallow position. And this is the kind of position that most people are in. But it sounds like you are more like this, more like flat, where you actually need to steepen it to get into a shallow position. So as long as you're getting that club, we talk about the consistency cone in the shallowing course. As long as it sounds like you would actually be getting it underneath the consistency cone if you were flat. And then, so I would just try to do what feels normal to you and try to get the club shallow from there. And then if you can't get the club shallow from there, then I would look at maybe steepening it in the backswing. And really what it comes down to, making swing changes is not a super easy thing. If you're changing something, it's expected to feel weird and wrong, right? It's going to, because it is different. So you have to basically do enough repetition doing it until it becomes comfortable, right? And I wish I could tell you it's just something that's going to make it click, but it just doesn't work that way. If you're making a swing change, it takes time, and it's going to feel weird, and it's going to feel off, but that's just because it's different. Semk says, nowhere can I see an explanation for the shank. I shank my 56 in 60-degree wedges on 10 to 20-yard pitches. Why do I do this? I don't shank anything else. I actually had the exact same question earlier. Basically, what it means is that you're hitting everything off the heel, and you're paying for it with wedges, because the wedges, there's much more of this hosel exposed, right? This is a 56-degree wedge. Look at how much this hosel is out, right? So if I hit the ball there with this club, I'm going to hit it off the hosel. Whereas if I hit it there with my 7-iron, I might not hit it off the hosel because the hosel isn't sticking out that much. So you're just hitting everything off the heel is what's likely going on. So you need to try to change. You need to try to hit the ball off the toe is basically what you need to do. So if you want more information on that, Sam, I would recommend watching the archived office hours. I think it was the very first question that I got. We got more questions here, so I'm not going to go over it again. But if you want to check out the archived office hours from today after we're done with this, you can go back to the office hours highlights page and scroll down the bottom of that page and watch the archived office hours where I go over the answer to how to get the strikes out of the heel. The short answer is just to try to hit the ball off the toe. Tom M says, think he has a computer failure. Lots of unanswered questions. I'm not trying to skip questions. Did I skip anybody? let's go back to the beginning. Let's see if you can let me know who I skipped. As far as I know, I'm not having computer problems. I mean, I only answer questions that were asked today, like within the first. Basically, I'll answer all the questions starting. Basically, I started with Ross in. I answered Tom's question. I answered Daryl's question. I answered Robert's question. Jim. Yep, Dave. Answered that one. Sam. Ball speed of 7-iron. Yep. Tom K's Shafleen one. Don Logan answered his. Burn S answered his. Tom K answered his. Sam's, I answered his. Answered the second question. As far as I can tell, Tom, I've answered all the questions. If you're seeing questions that I haven't answered, that's because they were asked like on other office hours. That's probably what you're seeing. So if you want to see the answers to those questions, all you have to do is go to the archived office hours, and watch. You can see the answers to those questions there. So Gary W says suggestions. The other thing that might go back to that. Sorry. The other thing that may be going on is there could be some lag here. So you may not be watching this in real time. You may be watching it like 20 minutes. So earlier when I was waiting on a question, you're probably seeing all the questions there. When in reality, in real time, there wasn't any questions, but you're watching it on a lag, probably like 20 minutes later when there was more questions. It'd be my guess. So Gary W says suggestions for getting rid of shanks on 30-yard chip. So it's the third time answering this question today. You're got to hit the ball off the toe. That's my suggestion. Try to hit the ball off the toe. Change your intention, right? So you're trying to hit the ball in the center of the face right now, but you're hitting it off the hosel. So you got to change your intention to hitting off the toe, and you got to keep doing that until you actually start hitting the ball off the toe, and then you've adapted, and then you can start hitting the ball in the center of the face again. It's funny. I can't remember the last time I had a question about shanking wedges, and then we got 3 people asking about it today. Must be a bug going around. It's probably been a few weeks between the last time I got that question. All right, we got 10 minutes or so left. If we got any more questions. So Chris H says, is there something about shallowing that promotes shanking? Certainly, yes. So when you shallow the club, it essentially opens the face, and it also gets the sweet spot of the club working more toward the ball. So if you're someone who was coming down steep before, right, meaning that you're kind of swinging to the left and over the top, right? Well, if you're doing that, then the sweet spot's basically working toward you, right? So if you adapted to doing that and you adapted to hitting the ball in the center of the face with the club working toward you, right, with the sweet spot working toward you, then if you get it swinging more from the inside, that can definitely promote a shank, right? Because then it's the opposite of what you're doing. So, and then the other part of it is that if you're shallowing it without getting the club face square, right, well, then I'm just kind of leading with the hosel, especially if I'm hitting a wedge, right? So those two things can definitely lead to a shank. So when you're working on shallowing out the club, you definitely may need to start feeling like you're hitting the ball off the toe, especially if you were someone that was coming over the top and steep before. And then you also want to make sure that you're getting that club face square. That's why we start out with getting the club face closed, right? Because if I have that face open and I'm coming down, that hosel's leading the way. I'm basically shrinking the club face, right? So imagine if the club's coming at you like this, if it's square, I got all this club face to work with, right? But if the club face is coming at you like this, right, I only have this much. There's a very, very small amount. That face is very open. So that's why the first part of the shallowing course, we're telling you, hey, let's get the club face closed, and then we start to shallow it. So new mound. Or Stephen Q says, does a higher finish promote more speed? Not necessarily. I mean, it certainly can help you because it's an indication that you're letting all of your momentum go and you're coming all the way around. You're getting everything turned through the ball, coming through with a high finish. But I mean, not necessarily. I mean, you can come through in a high finish and swing slow. Right? I can do this. Right? This is a high finish, but I just swung really, really slow. So it's not necessarily an indication, but or it doesn't necessarily guarantee more speed. But generally, it's an indication that you're letting all of your momentum go if you're coming all the way around into a full finish or a high finish. Excuse me. Sorry, got a tickle in my throat now. Went down the wrong tube. So Chris H says, good stuff today. No problem. Chris. So we got 5 minutes or so left. If we got more questions, probably fit a few more in. If you're just catching the tail end of this, we got about 5 minutes left or so. I can probably answer a couple more questions if they're fast ones. So if you got them, go ahead and put them in there. If not, we'll be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern time. All right. Well, if we don't have any more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap it up right there. Thanks everybody for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Everybody have a good rest of your day, and I'll talk to you all next time.